Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and it's time for another Steam sale, which means it's time for another video full of recommendations on some of the best deals to check out. As always, my focus is on strategy, tactics, sim, and management style gaming, and there's something for everyone in this video. If you like what you see here, make sure to let me know with a like and a comment down below, and if you have any thoughts or suggestions of your own, make sure to share them in the comments too. As always, there are timestamps to jump around as you wish down below, and with that said, let's begin. Expeditions Rome is currently on sale for $33 at 25% off, and is the hotly anticipated addition to the Expedition series of historical tactical RPGs. It absolutely lives up to expectations. Putting you in the shoes of a Roman noble family's young child, you find yourself having fled your home after your father was the target of a political assassination. It's not long before you find yourself in charge of military matters across multiple theaters of war, managing resources, upgrading your war camps, visiting cities free and occupied, and engaging in the main quest as well as side quests that drag you into all manner of encounters, from old school wrestling to assassination plots of your own. All the standard trappings of the genre can be found here. Name your character, pick a class, determine skills, earn XP for your own character as well as others in your party, leveling them up over time, unlocking more skills and abilities, all while seeking out and equipping better quality gear that opens up new skills and special abilities of their own when equipped. Your war camp serves as your HQ for all your operations, and as you upgrade it and assign centurions and troops to various tasks, you'll be able to invest in crafting your own gear, upgrading troop morale, healing badly injured party members, and other broad strokes activities that provide various benefits in tactical battles, as well as the larger scale strategic battles. That's right, apart from the turn-based, grid-based battles where you balance action points, cover, damage output, special abilities, etc., you'll also be engaging in a whole different kind of battle where you pick strategies for the army under your command. Expeditions Rome has a lot going on, and between the random events and encounters when traversing the maps as well as the main and side quests you'll engage in at the various cities and points of interest, there is just a ton to get lost in the best possible way. I had a great time with Expeditions Rome, and if you're a fan of the genre and the setting, you almost certainly will too. Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous is currently only $30 at 50% off, and it's certainly one of the best CRPGs out there right now, well worth the price tag. Based on the Pathfinder tabletop RPG system, the game boasts a very in-depth character creation system, an engaging storyline, and a compelling battle system that'll be familiar to players of the previous title, Pathfinder Kingmaker, where you can choose to either play in a turn-based mode or using real-time with pause instead if you prefer something a bit more dynamic. Now, just to be clear, even though I called Pathfinder Kingmaker the previous title, they're not actually sequential. You don't need to have played Kingmaker to understand what's going on in Wrath of the Righteous, so don't worry about having to keep up with the plot or anything like that. You can absolutely get Wrath of the Righteous on its own at its current price without having to worry about Kingmaker, though that was a very good game too. Either way, whether you're wandering around and engaging in conversation, or you're fighting battles or looking for hidden levers and treasures, Wrath of the Righteous does a very good job of translating the tabletop system into a digital format, and it keeps all character archetypes compelling rather than showing preferential treatment for a specific type of play over another. While the game and its options can certainly be very overwhelming to newcomers, it does a decent job of explaining what's what using tooltips, and even though mistakes can be quite expensive in a game like this, I find them to be part of the fun when it comes to RPGs. That might just be me though. From using stealth to sneak around, to popping all kinds of wild spells to gain an advantage against particularly deadly foes, to trying to find synergies between your party members, Wrath of the Righteous has everything you'd expect from a game like this and more. Larger-than-life enemies, a grand story to follow, and interesting twists and turns through it all. On top of that, you get the opportunity to lead Crusader armies as a separate activity from your traditional role-playing elements, and though I much preferred the classic RPG elements, I didn't mind the added extra layer that helped change things up and keep things interesting with a shift in pace from time to time. Either way, Wrath of the Righteous is an easy game to sink a lot of time into, and I'd highly recommend it at full price, let alone on sale. Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate Daemonhunters absolutely blew me away when it released earlier this year, and it's currently 10% off, which isn't much, but still absolutely worth it. Whether you're a fan of the universe or not, if you're a fan of turn-based tactics games, this one is a must-buy, and I'd go so far as to say this is the best 40k game in the genre we've got in the last decade or so. It puts you in charge of the Grey Knights, an extremely powerful chapter of the Space Marines that specifically fights demons from the warp, and your outfit finds itself pit against the latest machinations of the Chaos God Nurgle, a god of pestilence and disease and death who has brought a plague to the sector, forcing you to travel from planet to planet, studying the plague and the enemies it births, diving into turn-based tactical combat to fight back. In battle, you'll be running around, taking cover, tossing grenades, and using special abilities that tap into the dangerous warp from which the demons themselves come, but on your ship, you're going to spend time managing research, upgrading parts of the ship itself, upgrading gear, upgrading your knights, and moving from infestation zone to infestation zone. Even on normal difficulties, the game is rather punishing, and it has some interesting twists when it comes to battles too. For one, tapping into the warp to supercharge your attacks or use special abilities brings the potential for random events and upgrades to your enemies, forcing you to stay on your toes. Even just attacking your enemies might trigger them to upgrade through mutations if you've let the plague get far enough on the planet you're fighting on. Meanwhile, scoring critical hits will let you choose what body parts to lop off and what debuffs or modifiers to apply to the targeted enemy. And finally, the environments are very interactive, and the sheer strength and prowess of the Grey Knights are on full display when pushing over columns and braziers or when tossing parts of the environment at enemies. There is just so much going on in this game, and it's an absolute joy to play. It's the perfect kind of over-the-top action while maintaining the grim, dark vibes of the universe and pushing the feeling of an XCOM game. Suzerain is currently available for $9 at 50% off, and as a text-based RPG, it's a slightly different sort of strategy game where it presents many of the similar concepts through a completely different lens from the usual. You play as the newly elected president of an ailing nation, a refugee crisis, a failing economy, internal strife, terrorism, political violence, you name it, you got it. What's more, in this fictional reflection of the real-world 50s, you're seeing the rise of global superpowers and the formation of military blocs, and you sit at a strategic crossroads for both groups, a potential pawn in their game, or one to stand on its own 2 feet as the looming threat of invasion by historical rivals poses an ever-present threat. As president, you make vital decisions to try and heal your nation, or perhaps lead it with an iron grip. Through conversations with your ministers and influential figures in and outside your nation, you'll decide where to invest your government budget and how best to tackle the various issues plaguing the nation. Every decision will have consequences the world over. A choice early on in the game might come back to bite you or support you further down the line. A kind word to one party might upset another, and fighting corruption might be as much trouble as participating in it. Different personalities need to be managed so your cabinet doesn't fall apart alongside your nation, and whether you're interested in investing in infrastructure or military or foreign affairs as a priority, the nation will respond. But it's all done in this text-based story form. There are countless branching paths and many ways to slice this cake, each one as fun and delicious as the last. This is your chance to finally test how well you'd manage as president of a nation in peril, balancing egos, personalities, plots, and conspirators to get re-elected for another term, if you even survive that long. Suzerain is great fun, and it's absolutely worth grabbing at this price. Wildermyth is currently on sale for just $22 at 25% off and is well worth every penny. A tactical fantasy RPG, Wildermyth leans into the idea of myth and legend, focused on generative storytelling where you don't just engage with the game's narrative, but become integral to it, building your own long-running stories and legacies. Whether you play the story-driven campaigns or the sandbox adventures, you start by building out the characters of your party, choosing between a few different classes. Melee combatants, ranged combatants, and spellcasters, and you'll also keep an eye on character traits that'll determine how they behave with the world or with each other, sometimes reflected in decisions they make themselves, and at other times in options presented to you as the player. Whether during character creation or during a particular adventure, decisions made will permanently evolve the character. Perhaps you come across new equipment, perhaps you develop a skill, a mutation, a special ability, or maybe you acquire a pet. Whatever happens in any one playthrough becomes a permanent part of the involved character, and when you go to start another playthrough for another story or another sandbox adventure, you can choose to bring back old characters and their existing stories, expanding on those legacies. You see, The world comes alive with characters of your own making who've all gone through their own trials and tribulations, traveling through procedurally generated maps, going from location to location, recruiting help and fighting all sorts of enemies in turn-based tactical combat, seeing enemies upgrade over time and planning assaults on villages that you have to protect, or otherwise you're chasing some grand story and great objective or another. Multiplayer modes, challenging higher difficulties, and random map generation really keeps things interesting for a long time with Wildermyth, but at its heart, there's a beautiful game about building the lore and myth of a world, playing as the adventurers that will have songs sung about their deeds, misdeeds, and more. Surviving the Aftermath is currently $23 at 30% off, and it just recently received a new piece of DLC that promises to add greater variety to a colony management game that's already got a lot going on. The base game has you try to survive in a post-apocalyptic Earth, helping your colonists settle down, re-establish society, and grow new roots. Locally scavenged plastics, steel, and concrete become essential building materials as you try to gain access to clean water and sources of food, building structures with which folks can meet their basic needs of home, health, hygiene, and sustenance. You'll manage tasks for seniors, adults, and children in your society, and over time, slowly but surely, you go from a hunter-gatherer society to one that does its own farming and rears its own animals and uses modern protein sources for food instead, needing to manage electricity and a growing workforce, all while tackling random events and periodic new arrivals at your camp that may or may not be friendly. The tech tree explores very interesting post-apocalyptic ideas, opening up new sources of essential resources, if not entirely new kinds of jobs and tasks, and your specialists, meanwhile, can be sent off to the greater world to explore and find resource deposits, fight bandits, or perhaps set up trade routes with other colonies so you can get missing resources. Specialists excel at different types of tasks, and as you run around the world, you'll be scavenging, scouting, and stealing all manner of things, including cars to drive around in, and weapons and electronic components to help in your colony's survival. Later on, you can establish outposts in the world to provide pit stops and additional support out there, and you'll constantly come across quests and opportunities that take you from place to place in search of answers and solutions. The game can get quite punishing in harder difficulties, and even in easier modes, it is an absolute joy to play as you manage a growing settlement of survivors in an unforgiving world full of periodic calamities, people that want to kill you, and perhaps just a little bit of hope for the future. Gears Tactics is currently $16 at 67% off, though just a quick heads up before I go on, it does also come with the Xbox Game Pass. Set in the Gears of War universe, Gears Tactics brings all the brutal, visceral expectations alongside the absolutely beautiful audiovisual design and places you in charge of a small squad as you go through a relatively linear story, upgrading equipment, acquiring new skills, and fighting off the locusts. This is probably the most beautiful game in the genre, and it does a very good job of bringing in the usual tropes while adding its own flair. Sure, you'll be using action points to move around, taking cover, tossing grenades, setting up Overwatch angles, etc., etc., but the game brings in old Gears of War ideas like down but not out as a way to perform executions and acquire additional action points to gain more momentum during a battle. Or it brings in the iconic weapons from the setting and uses them in novel ways, or perhaps you'll notice it pits you against some of the most interesting and impressive beasts from the universe, larger-than-life enemies with very interesting sort of attack patterns that you have to adapt to and overcome. Movement also works differently, ignoring any type of grid or hex, and instead allowing you to fine-tune waypoint placement to zigzag past Overwatch cones or otherwise get to the exact spot you want to get to for protection, or better angles of fire, or better angles to throw grenades from. Damage output is through the roof even with the most pitiful sidearms, so you have this feeling of extremely aggressive play, but you're always significantly outnumbered by a relatively intelligent enemy that will outmaneuver you at times and surprise you, flanking you, setting up Overwatch, and much more besides. There's really not too much to say about Gears Tactics. It's a high-octane, high-momentum battle tactics game, and a genre that often feels a little slow and plodding gets a serious dose of adrenaline here, and the Gears of War fan in me was absolutely pleased, while the strategy and tactics fan in me was having a great time too. Gears Tactics was a surprise gem, well worth its current price tag, well worth full price even, but get it now on sale. Battlesector is currently available for $29 at 35% off, and its recent updates have made it a solid Warhammer 40k title in my books. A punchy, fast-paced, turn-based tactics game, the game at launch pitched your Blood Angel Space Marines against the hive-minded Tyranids and took you through a solid narrative with all the flair and drama you'd expect from the universe. It was alright, but with the latest free update, a new gameplay mode introduces a completely new way to play that removes the narrative and instead creates a sandbox battle for the planet where you can choose which of the two factions to play as, and you have the added responsibility of managing and claiming resources, building up your HQ, and managing your units in a more meaningful way. What's more, this mode includes the Necrons as enemies, even if you don't have the new DLC that actually adds them. Getting the DLC simply makes them playable, and there are many more such updates and DLCs planned for the near future. With asymmetric balance and unique abilities, strengths, and weaknesses, each faction is fun to play or fight in its own way, and Battlesector has become rather easy to recommend with these recent upgrades especially. Fans of the setting will enjoy the narrative campaign most, but even newcomers to the universe can get quite a bit out of this one. Frostpunk is currently available for just $8 at 75% off, and if you haven't tried the game yet, now is definitely the time to dive in before Frostpunk 2 releases sometime later this year or early next. A survival city builder with a great narrative, Frostpunk is chock full of unique ideas as you try to survive in a Victorian-era apocalypse that has turned the world into a snowscape. You're trying to build a safe haven for your people in this ice age, and as you manage the scarce resources and send out search parties in the hopes of finding other survivors, if not more resources to use, you'll try and keep your people's hopes up while managing their work shifts and tackling moral dilemmas, making decisions whose consequences accumulate over time, spelling success or doom depending on how they accumulate. Parts of Frostpunk will sound similar to other survival city builders, but Frostpunk goes beyond anything else I've seen out there before or since its release. Brutal shifts in climate will have you scampering to complete research you fell behind on, managing people's workloads, and seeing them strike or riot applies a special kind of pressure to you as the player, and tracking stats like hope just makes everything feel that much more bleak as you see the ripple effects of all your best intentions sometimes play out for the worst. The base game has multiple scenarios, and the DLC are all great too, further expanding on the interesting narrative in a very interesting world. With a sequel right around the corner, now's a great time to see what all the hype and fuss was about if you haven't already. Frostpunk is a must-buy at full price, so it's very easy to recommend on sale. Total War Warhammer 1 and 2 are currently seeing huge discounts, and though Total War Warhammer 3 had a bit of a lackluster launch, the developers are still working hard on the impressive culmination of over 7 or so years of work. A combined map that allows you to play as any of the factions from all 3 games across a massive map that spans nearly the whole Warhammer Fantasy Battles world. In order to play that though, you'll need to have the prior 2 base games, and if you haven't picked them up yet, now is a great time to do so since the combined map will likely be released before the next sale happens. If you have the base games, you might consider picking up the DLC you're missing too. While not essential for the combined map experience, they all add compelling new units or factions to the classic Total War blend of turn-based empire management and real-time battles. If you're even remotely interested in the world of Warhammer Fantasy Battles and you played it on tabletop, this is probably the definitive experience for at least a decade to come. And if you're curious about the Total War games, this is certainly the most over-the-top and eye-catching introduction to it, even if some of the systems are a little more simplified than usual. If you're grabbing one, I recommend grabbing the other 2, so that way you'll have access to the combined map between the first 2 games, and then eventually, when the 3rd game gets its combined map, you'll be able to access that too. Total War Warhammer 3 isn't going anywhere anytime soon, so you'll want to make sure you have these 2 games to get access to the whole package when it eventually becomes available across all 3 titles later this year. And hey, while you wait for that, you have 2 excellent Total War games to play. If you have any recommendations of your own, remember to leave them in the comments down below, but these are some of the best deals for some of the best games that I think are well worth picking up, especially at these prices. For more strategy, sim, tactical, and management gaming content, don't hesitate to subscribe to this channel, and if you're curious about what we have to look forward to over the next 12 or so months of gaming, I've got a video linked on screen right now that you might be interested in. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.